You know how people say funerals bring families together? They're wrong. Sometimes they just bring secrets to the surface, polished and disguised, like the mahogany casket at the front of the room. That morning, I sat 3 pews back, right-hand side. Everyone around me was dressed in black, faces composed like they were performing for a camera that wasn't there. But grief wasn't the emotion thick in the air. It was tension, thick and metallic, like the scent of polished brass and wilting lilies. I hadn't cried yet. Not really. I felt like I was watching someone else's life from behind a pane of glass. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, my gloves still damp from the drizzle outside. Before I continue, don't forget to like this video, comment where you're watching from, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Then my mother leaned in. Not for comfort, not to say she loved me, but to whisper words that knocked the air straight out of my lungs. "Don't tell them what you know," my mother whispered. I turned slowly to look at her, stunned. Her gaze never left the casket. Her voice was barely audible over the low hum of the organ warming up behind us. But I heard her clear as day. And just like that, the flowers weren't the only thing masking the truth. Her words rang louder than the music that started seconds later. "Don't tell them what you know." The weight of those 8 words settled in my chest like a brick, because it confirmed something I hadn't even said out loud. The secret wasn't just real, it was dangerous. 2 rows in front of me, Uncle Harris shifted uncomfortably in his seat, whispering something to his wife. She nodded too fast, like she'd practiced it. Cousin Jeremy kept checking his watch, and Aunt Lynn was already dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief before the service had even started. They were all here. Not for Grandpa, but for what he'd left behind. I should have known. No, I did know. That whisper from my mother didn't birth the suspicion, it confirmed it. She knew what I knew, and she was scared. The minister stepped up to the podium. "We are gathered here today to honor the life of a great man, William Alcott." His voice was solemn, steady. Words meant to comfort. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was still stuck on my mother's voice. "Don't tell them what you know." It wasn't just a warning, it was a command. But why now? Why here? And why me? She hadn't spoken more than 5 sentences to me in the past year. Not since Grandpa got sick. Now suddenly, I was her confidant? Or her liability? I looked at her again. Her expression was stone. The kind of expression people wear when they're playing defense. The funeral service droned on, the slideshow played. Childhood photos, faded Polaroids, his old war medals. I could barely watch. Because my mind was flickering through images of something else entirely, something I wasn't supposed to see. And now, with those 8 words, I knew it wasn't just something I stumbled upon. It was a thread tied to something bigger. A thread my mother desperately didn't want me to pull. When the eulogies ended and we filed out to the burial site, I moved slower than the rest. My heels sank into the wet ground. My coat soaked at the hem. I stood beside the casket as it was lowered, lips pressed tight. My hand trembled slightly as I dropped a white rose onto the polished surface. But it wasn't just grief shaking me. It was the weight of knowing. The burden of silence. At the reception, everyone milled around like nothing had happened. There was laughter, real laughter, near the buffet table. Wine being poured too generously. I heard Uncle Harris say, "He lived a long life, and we all helped make it comfortable. I think we can feel proud." I nearly choked on my sip of water. Helped? Where were they when he couldn't remember where his slippers were? When he spilled soup on himself because his hands shook too hard to hold a spoon? I knew the answer. I was there. I was the one. But I said nothing. I just smiled politely at anyone who approached and gave my condolences like they hadn't been manufactured in advance. Later in the kitchen, I confronted her. "Why did you say that?" I asked my mother, keeping my voice low. She didn't look up from her wine glass. "Because this family feeds on chaos," my mother said. "And you, whether you like it or not, have the match." I stared at her, my mouth dry. "They don't know what he gave you," she added. "And it's better that way." "He didn't give me anything," I said quietly. "That's what they should believe," she replied. And then she turned and walked away. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom. The posters were gone, replaced by dusty guest linens and furniture that hadn't been updated in a decade. The rain tapped against the window, and I thought about the envelope in my suitcase, the one Grandpa had given me the last time I saw him. He had slipped it into my hands like it was a sacred trust. "When the time comes, you'll know," he'd whispered, his voice fragile. I hadn't opened it yet, not fully, but I felt its weight in my mind now. He'd known. He'd known exactly what kind of family he was leaving behind, and he'd chosen me. So when my mother whispered those 8 words at the funeral, they didn't just scare me. They confirmed something else too. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't wrong. They were all pretending. And my silence? It was the only thing keeping their performances intact. But for how long? It happened on a Wednesday, 3 weeks before the funeral, before the whisper, before the envelope burned a hole in my suitcase. I had stopped by Grandpa's house to drop off his prescriptions and a container of my homemade chicken stew. He liked it with extra dill and thick-cut carrots, and he always made a show of pretending it was too salty, only to scrape the bottom of the bowl 10 minutes later. He was resting in the sunroom when I arrived, eyes closed but breathing steady. The nurse had just stepped out for a break, and I didn't want to wake him. I moved quietly, placing the stew in the fridge and sorting through the mail he always forgot on the side table. That's when I heard it. Voices. Low, urgent, and sharp, coming from the study. The door was mostly closed, but it hadn't latched, and when I walked past to head down the hall, one sentence made me stop cold. "She doesn't deserve anything. She's just the caretaker. Not even family, not really." The voice was Aunt Lynn. I froze. I wasn't supposed to hear that. I leaned back, careful not to let the floorboards creak. The room beyond the door fell silent for a moment. Then another voice spoke. "Uncle Harris. William's out of his mind. You saw that letter, right? If that holds, we're talking about 7 figures just gone." "He's sick," Aunt Lynn replied. "Legally, it might not hold, especially if we act before the will is read." There was a pause. "We need to talk to Ruth," Uncle Harris said. My mother. I shouldn't have stayed, but I did. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The way they'd swooped in during the final month, the sudden concern, the fake check-ins, the overly concerned questions. They weren't grieving. They were calculating. If we split it evenly, after taxes and liquidations, that gives us each a base of... That was Cousin Jeremy. I nearly gasped. Jeremy? He hadn't visited Grandpa once in the past year. Not once. He posted filtered gym selfies and fake motivational quotes on social media, always ending with #hustle_harder. "Jeremy, stop doing math," Aunt Lynn snapped. "He's still alive, for God's sake." "Barely," Jeremy said. "And you said yourself, caretaker girls already got him signing nonsense." Caretaker girl. That's what I was to them. Not his granddaughter, not Mara, just caretaker girl. I backed away from the door before I did something I'd regret. My fingers were trembling. I walked back down the hallway, past the kitchen, into the quiet of the laundry room. I sat on the closed lid of the washing machine and stared at my own shoes. They were fighting over a man who wasn't dead yet, speaking like the money was already theirs, like the man in the next room wasn't still breathing. When I returned to the sunroom, Grandpa's eyes were open. He smiled at me. His voice was papery soft. "You always walk quieter when you're thinking," Grandpa said. I knelt beside him. "I brought your stew," I told him. He reached for my hand. "You heard them, didn't you?" Grandpa asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed their words in my mind over and over again. Their tone wasn't just cold, it was entitled, like they were redistributing assets on a spreadsheet, not a legacy, like Grandpa had already been erased. The next morning, I came back to the house with no excuse. I just wanted to be close to him, to make sure he was okay. He didn't bring up what I'd heard, but his eyes lingered longer on mine. And at one point, he said something that's stayed with me since. A person's value isn't what they leave behind. It's who they trust to carry it forward. The following week, I found something. I wasn't snooping. Not exactly. I had gone to refill Grandpa's humidifier. The cabinet where the distilled water was kept had gotten stiff. I had to give it a tug. And when I did, a folder fell out from the top shelf. It was thin, blue, with Grandpa's handwriting on the label. My name. Just my name. I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a letter, folded neatly, unreadable in the moment because my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. The second? A legal notice. Not stamped, but initialed. Something about an independent trust. My name, again. I slipped both back into the folder and tucked it into my tote bag. I told myself it was just for safekeeping. But the truth? I think I already knew. That weekend, the whole family showed up. All of them. Suddenly, there were rotations of people checking in, bringing food, offering support. Grandpa wasn't fooled. He kept our visits the same. Quiet mornings, slow walks to the garden, the occasional game of checkers he let me win. But I could see it wearing on him. The noise, the fakery. One afternoon, after another round of distant cousins came and left, he looked out the window and said softly, "They're all circling, but they don't even know what they're circling for." And then, just days before he passed, I walked in on a final conversation I wasn't meant to hear. This time, it was in the hallway. Loud, rushed, urgent. My mother. On the phone. I only caught the end. "No, if she says anything, it complicates the entire distribution. You said the lawyer didn't have it on record, so that buys us time. Just keep her quiet. I'll handle it." She turned and saw me. We locked eyes. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just said, "You're home early." Later that night, she brought me tea. She didn't mention the call. She didn't explain. She just placed the cup beside me and said, "Some truths ruin everything. Don't pick a fight you can't finish." Then she left. The tea went cold. I never drank it. By the time Grandpa passed, I had stopped trying to make sense of it. They'd already decided who I was. Caretaker girl, the invisible one, the quiet background character in their inheritance drama. They thought I was too meek, too polite, too forgettable to matter. They didn't realize I had already seen behind the curtain. And now I had choices. But the hardest part was knowing that Grandpa had made his choice too, and that it wasn't going to be simple, not for them, not for me. Because the storm that was coming, it didn't start with the funeral. It started weeks before, in that hallway, behind that door, with those words I was never supposed to hear. He trusted me with the end, not the glamorous part, not the estate or the stock portfolio or the country house they all pretend to care about now. The real end. The letter was tucked into the back of the blue folder I had found in the cabinet. I hadn't read it, not really, until the day after the funeral. I had skimmed it before. I'd seen my name, his handwriting, the loops and dips in the ink that already made my throat tighten, but I couldn't absorb it. Not until the house was empty. Not until the flowers wilted and the trays of untouched food were packed up in foil. Not until the scent of lilies and stale grief faded from my jacket. That night, I lit a candle and sat at the little desk in my childhood room. The letter trembled in my hands. I unfolded it, slowly, and read the words he had written just for me. Mara, if you're reading this, it means I've left the room for the last time. That was how it began. There's so much I want to say, so much I hope you already know, but I'll say the most important part first. Thank you. Not for the caretaking. Not for the food or the medicine or the reminders to take my pills, though I needed all of those. Thank you for showing up, for staying. My chest ached. You were the only one who didn't treat me like a stepping stone. The only one who saw me as a man, not a vault. And that's why I'm trusting you with what comes next. I paused. My hands were sweating, because I knew there was something else, and I wasn't ready. But I kept reading. You'll find a brass key taped to the back of this letter. It opens a safety deposit box at Grayson Bank, downtown branch. Use your ID and this letter to access it. Inside is the documentation. You'll know what to do. I turned the page. The key was there. Small, dull, but heavy with unspoken weight. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. Because suddenly, everything shifted. I didn't just suspect there was something more. I had it. The next morning, I took the first bus downtown. The woman at the desk looked at the letter, checked my ID twice, then led me into the back vault without a word. The box was longer than I expected, metal, scuffed at the edges. I opened it. Inside, a leather folder, a flash drive, and one folded document with a legal seal I'd never seen before. The folder held property deeds, not just one, but 3. One for the lake cabin everyone thought was sold, another for the building he rented out to businesses in town, and a third for a small cottage on the edge of the state park, the one I used to dream about escaping to when life felt too loud. All signed over to me, quietly, privately, no will, no public record, just me. The flash drive held scanned copies of documents, letters, statements, a note from a lawyer in another city, someone not on the family radar, someone Grandpa had clearly trusted to help him structure this in secret. And the folded document? A notarized letter declaring the establishment of a private trust fund built over decades. For me, to be used at my discretion, for my future. With one instruction. Do not waste this on those who left when it was inconvenient to stay. I left the bank shaking, not with joy, with pressure. Because now I understood why my mother had whispered what she did. Don't tell them what you know. She knew. Maybe not the full extent, but enough. Enough to know the moment they found out, it would rip the family apart. Because this wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that the man they claimed to love didn't trust them. Proof that the one they dismissed, the one they called caretaker girl, had been the one he counted on when it actually mattered. I didn't tell anyone. Not right away. I took the documents and placed them in my own safety deposit box. I deleted the files from the flash drive and saved them to encrypted cloud storage. I didn't even tell my mother. Until the day of the funeral. And even then, it wasn't because I chose to. It was because she looked at me a little too long. And I made the mistake of not looking away. She saw it, that I knew, and she panicked. So she leaned over, just before the minister began, and she whispered, "Don't tell them what you know." I didn't nod. I didn't blink. I just stared straight ahead. But in that moment, I felt the weight settle squarely on my shoulders. He told me I had his trust. And now, I had his secrets too. That night, after the funeral, I found her standing alone in the hallway. My mother, she was staring at a portrait of Grandpa in his Navy uniform, fingers twitching against her wine glass. I stepped beside her. "You knew," I said quietly. She didn't look at me. "I suspected," my mother said. "I didn't know it would be this." "Why didn't he tell you?" I asked. My mother finally turned. "Because he stopped trusting me years ago," she said. "And I stopped trying to earn it." Her voice was brittle. Then she added, "But you stayed." There was no apology in her tone, just weary acknowledgement. And I realized, in that moment, she wasn't just afraid of the inheritance. She was afraid of what it said about her. I didn't reveal anything that night. Let them think I got nothing. Let them believe I was still the invisible one, because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits, watches, lets people show their true colors. And when the time is right, it speaks, not in shouts, but in documents, deeds, and truths too heavy to carry for anyone but the one they were meant for. It started with coffee, bitter, burned, and poured into chipped mugs at the long conference table in a lawyer's office that smelled like paper and dust. The Alcott family was gathered around as if we were preparing for a trial instead of a will reading. But in a way, we were. And I already knew the verdict. I took a seat at the far end of the table. Not near the front where Aunt Lynn sat, with her pearls jangling like she owned the room. Not near Cousin Jeremy, who was still refreshing his phone between sighs. And definitely not near my mother, who had been avoiding eye contact since the funeral ended. The lawyer arrived 10 minutes late, flustered and formal. His name was Mr. Dale, thin, polite, the kind of man who used paper clips with purpose and had likely never raised his voice in public. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Dale said. "I know this is a difficult time. William Alcott was a beloved member of this community and your family." Aunt Lynn interrupted almost immediately. Yes, he was a saint. Can we proceed?" Aunt Lynn said. Mr. Dale cleared his throat. "Of course. Per Mr. Alcott's instructions, we'll proceed with the reading of the will, as submitted and filed 6 years ago." 6 years. That meant before the illness, before the trust, before the cottage, before me. The room went quiet. Mr. Dale adjusted his glasses and began. "To my son, Thomas Alcott," Mr. Dale read. My uncle, long divorced, rarely seen, nodded like he was accepting an award. "I leave my vintage watch collection, the sailboat docked at Crescent Marina, and the coin box in my study." "He never even sailed that thing," Cousin Brian muttered. "Quiet," Aunt Lynn snapped. "To my daughter, Ruth Alcott Maynard," Mr. Dale continued. "The kind that smells like antiseptic and warm milk. The kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m. because someone forgot where they were and needed a familiar voice in the dark. The kind that leaves your clothes smelling faintly of menthol rub and humility." They weren't there for any of it. I was. It started small, just a few afternoons a week when his memory got patchy. Then a few nights, because he was waking up confused and didn't want a stranger in the house. Eventually, I moved in. No one really noticed, no one asked. He and I shared routines, coffee with too much sugar, crossword puzzles he refused to finish, quiet walks to the backyard even when his knees ached. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I loved him. Because he had been more of a father to me than anyone else. Because when I was 12 and terrified, he'd sat with me through the night and let me cry into his shirt without asking why. Because when my dad left, Grandpa stayed. My mother straightened slightly in her chair. I leave the main family home and all its contents, except those otherwise allocated. Additionally, I instruct that she receive my remaining annuity balance. My mother nodded. But I noticed her hands tighten around the arms of her chair. It wasn't everything. It wasn't control. Next came Aunt Lynn. To my daughter, Lynn Alcott Winters, I leave the contents of the safe deposit box at Oak Federal, the furnishings from the lake house, and the family photo albums. What? Aunt Lynn said. The furnishings? What about the house? Mr. Dale remained calm. The house was sold in 2019, Mr. Dale explained. The proceeds were used to fund Mr. Alcott's medical care and charitable donations. That can't be right, Aunt Lynn snapped. He told me I'd be getting it. I can only speak to what was filed, Mr. Dale replied. The room was shifting, shoulders straightening, arms crossing, faces tightening like ropes pulled taut. That's not possible, Aunt Lynn said. There was supposed to be an inheritance for the next generation. Mr. Dale flipped a page. Per Mr. Alcott's instructions, the remainder of the estate, after all allocations and legal fees, was donated to the Heritage Veterans Foundation. The silence was instant and loud. He donated it? Cousin Brian said. That can't be legal, Jeremy said. I don't understand, my mother said. What about the properties? The business building? The cabin? Mr. Dale looked down at his files. I have no record of those, Mr. Dale said. It's possible those were liquidated prior to the filing or transferred through a separate channel. My mother's eyes slid to me, just for a second, then back to the table. By the time he got to the cousins, the entitlement had curdled into pure expectation. To my grandson, Jeremy Winters. Jeremy perked up. I leave my set of military medals and first edition book collection. What the hell? Jeremy said. Books? I don't even read. Someone chuckled. You didn't visit either, muttered Cousin Brian. Jeremy whipped his head around. What's that supposed to mean? Jeremy asked. You know what it means, Brian said. You think you deserve the world just because you showed up in a suit today? Better than dressing like a janitor, Jeremy snapped. Okay. Mr. Dale raised his voice slightly. Please, let's maintain decorum. The room was unraveling. Fast. People were checking each other's reactions, counting how many items they had or hadn't received. Is there a final distribution? Aunt Lynn asked. A trust, perhaps? A fund for the grandchildren? There is no such clause in this will, Mr. Dale said. I said nothing. I hadn't moved. Because what I was given wasn't in this file. They wanted gold watches and trust funds. I had the one thing they didn't know to ask for. The real will. The private trust. The quiet document stored not in the lawyer's filing cabinet, but in a safety deposit box Grandpa had personally handed to me with a key taped behind a letter I now kept tucked in a fireproof safe. This is insane, Aunt Lynn said. He was of sound mind when this was filed? Absolutely, Mr. Dale said. Then this was manipulated, Jeremy yelled. Someone got to him. Someone poisoned his thinking. He looked straight at me when he said it. She was with him all the time, Jeremy said. She probably convinced him to shut us out. I raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. Let them spiral. Let the truth feel like a fog they couldn't see through. She didn't even get anything, Aunt Lynn said. Right, Mara? You're not even mentioned, are you? Everyone turned to me. Even Mr. Dale hesitated, shuffling his papers. I'm just here to honor his wishes, I said. Nothing more, nothing less. And that answer rattled them more than a confession ever could. The reading dissolved into chaos, people yelling over each other, accusations flying like darts, threats of legal challenges, demands for documentation. I stayed seated the whole time, calm, still, because while they were busy trying to divide what they thought remained, I had already been handed the only thing that mattered: legacy, and the burden of protecting it. By the time we left, my mother was silent again. She walked past me in the parking lot without a word, but her expression said it all. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to understand that something had been rewritten right under their noses, and she hadn't been the one holding the pen. I drove home alone, the folder locked in my glove box, the trust documents still sealed, the deeds resting under a blanket in the trunk, and Grandpa's letter, creased at the edges, soft from being reread, tucked into the inside pocket of my coat. He'd planned for this. He'd seen the greed. And he'd chosen me, not to punish them, but to protect what mattered. It's strange what people feel free to say when they think you have nothing. The tone gets lighter. The jabs get meaner. The smiles stretch a little too wide. It wasn't even 24 hours after the will reading, and already the jokes had started. We were all back at Aunt Lynn's house. Another post-funeral potluck, thrown together like grief, was something to feed rather than feel. Everyone stood in clusters, styrofoam plates in hand, plastic forks stabbing lukewarm pasta salad and dry rotisserie chicken. I hovered near the edge of the living room, not out of shyness, just preference. I watched as the people who claimed to love Grandpa more than life casually picked over the buffet table he would have hated. No one asked how I was doing, No one offered condolences anymore. They'd moved on. From him. From me. "She really didn't get a dime?" Cousin Jeremy asked. He wasn't even whispering. "Nope," said Cousin Tara with a smirk. "Did you see her face? It was like she expected something." "Maybe she'll get the leftover casserole," Jeremy said. They both laughed. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, not to hide, but to breathe. My fists were clenched in my coat pockets. I thought about leaving, but then I heard another voice from behind the counter. It was Aunt Lynn. "It's no surprise," Aunt Lynn said. "She always was the invisible one, just a shadow in the corner, following William around like a stray." "She probably thought taking care of him meant she'd get rewarded," said Tara, "like life's a Hallmark movie." "Well, she got her ending," said Aunt Lynn, quiet and broke. "I didn't cry, I didn't speak, I didn't flinch, because I already knew something they didn't. I had already visited the lawyer, the other one. His name was Mr. Farrow, a quiet man with gray hair and tired eyes. I'd met him 2 days before the funeral at a nondescript office 3 towns over. "Your grandfather was very particular," Mr. Farrow said. "He insisted that this file remain private until you personally came to retrieve it." He handed me a sealed envelope and a slim brown file with my initials etched in black ink. Inside were notarized records, digital access keys, a secondary trust account, and a handwritten letter that ended with, "If they laugh at you, let them. It means they don't see the mountain beneath your silence." So now, as they laughed, thinking they'd won, I simply sipped water from a plastic cup and listened. Because that's what silence does. It listens. It watches. It waits. Later that night, I sat on the porch swing alone, coat pulled tight against the wind. The moon hung low, almost swollen, like it too had something it wanted to say but knew better. My mother stepped out onto the porch. She didn't sit beside me, just hovered by the railing. "You didn't say a word in there," my mother said, "even after everything they said." I didn't respond. She sighed. You could have corrected them, my mother said. Shut them up. I shook my head. That's not why he gave it to me, I said. Then why did he? My mother asked. I looked up at her. Because I stayed, I said. Because I didn't ask for anything. She looked away, the porch light casting long shadows on her face. They won't take it well when they find out, my mother said. Then maybe they shouldn't have assumed, I said. The next morning, the group chat was already buzzing. I saw a message from Cousin Brian. Hey, does anyone know if Grandpa had a separate account or something? There's no record of the cabin sale. Then from Aunt Lynn. I'm calling Dale again. Something's off. And from Jeremy. Lowell, maybe Mara buried it in the backyard with the stew. I didn't reply. I deleted the thread. Not out of pettiness, out of peace. Because they were still chasing crumbs. And I already had the kitchen. By afternoon, the tone had changed. Tara messaged me privately. Hey, sorry if we were a little harsh yesterday. Tensions were high. No hard feelings, right? I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, a voicemail from Aunt Lynn. Mara, sweetheart, I was thinking about you this morning. We've always had our differences, but I want you to know you're part of this family. And if there's anything at all that you're unsure about, you should call me. Just to keep everything transparent, you know? Transparent. Right. That evening, I visited the cottage. The one Grandpa left me in secret. I unlocked the door for the first time with the brass key he'd taped to the back of his letter. The smell of cedar and memory hit me instantly. It was quiet, clean, untouched, like it had been waiting for me. I walked the room slowly, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket. On the mantel was a single photo, Grandpa and I, taken years ago. He was laughing. I was holding a fishing rod twice my height. He had framed it himself. No one else was in it. Just us. I sat on the worn armchair by the window, the fire pit unused but stacked neatly, and I let myself feel it. Not pride, not revenge, but something deeper. A kind of sacred, bittersweet knowing. They mocked my silence, because they thought silence meant weakness, but they forgot. Silence remembers, silence watches, silence listens, and when the time comes, silence speaks, but not in their language, not with screaming or bitterness or fights over casseroles and coin boxes. It speaks in deeds, in signatures, in final letters that say, you were the one. So let them laugh. Let them think they've already counted all the chips. Let them forget I was ever even in the room. Because while they were busy measuring inheritance in items and dollar signs, I was trusted with the one thing that couldn't be divided. Legacy, and the strength to carry it. Quietly, deliberately, on my own terms. I don't know what finally made me do it. Maybe it was the way Jeremy's voice echoed in my head every time I walked past the envelope. Maybe it was the silence from Aunt Lynn after her voicemail went unanswered. Or maybe it was the way my mother had stopped looking me in the eye, as if the weight of what she suspected was finally becoming too heavy to ignore. But that morning, I walked into my study, locked the door behind me, and sat down in front of the drawer where I'd kept it. The envelope was still there, untouched, sealed at the flap. My name written across the front in Grandpa's heavy, slanted hand. Mara. Just that. Nothing more. It felt like it had been waiting for me. Not with urgency, but with patience. I carried it to the kitchen table. Poured a cup of peppermint tea, the kind Grandpa used to sip after dinner while he watched the sun fade behind the trees. And then I sat in the morning light, fingers trembling slightly, and finally broke the seal. Inside, the letter was thick, 2 full pages, and something heavier paperclipped to the back. The first line made my throat close. If you're reading this, then I've already gone where I can't explain things in person. His words sounded like him, director. A little gruff, but warm, always warm. You probably waited to open this, didn't you? I knew you would. You never liked being the center of anything. But this time, you need to be. Not for them, for you. I could feel my heart pounding. There was something else in that envelope. I hadn't even touched it yet. But first, I kept reading. This family, they're loud. Always have been. And sometimes loud drowns out what matters. But not you. You sat with me in the quiet. You read to me when my eyes gave up. You cooked when my hands forgot how. You never asked for anything. You just showed up. I stopped reading for a second and let my hand fall to the table. My chest was too tight to continue. I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall yet. Then I turned to the second page. So here's what I've left for you. Not because you begged, not because you earned it through obligation, but because you stayed, because you listened, because I trust you. Behind the letter was a paper-clipped stack. Documents from Mr. Farrow, the second lawyer, the one no one else knew about. The first page outlined the contents of a private trust fund in my name, built over 2 decades through slow, intentional investments. The next listed 3 properties: the cottage by the state park, the business building in town, and the small lake house everyone thought had been sold. All legally transferred to me months ago. And the last? A handwritten addendum Grandpa had signed and dated himself, confirming the existence of an emergency account, modest but untouched. Just for me. He had labeled it, in quotes, "For the emergencies she'll never tell anyone about." I laughed softly through my tears. That was exactly like him. But it wasn't just the money, it wasn't even the property. It was what he wrote next that undid me. You are not invisible. You never were. You're the anchor. The one I counted on when my own body betrayed me. The one who held on when the rest let go. They'll say this is unfair, that I was confused. Let them. Truth doesn't shout. It sits steady. It outlasts them. I pressed the page against my chest and let the tears come. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not tolerated, not pitied, seen. He continued, I don't need you to fight for this. I made sure it's airtight, but I do need you to protect what it means. Not the money, the meaning. Don't let them make you doubt that you were the one who stood by me. They left when I needed family. You stayed. And that means more than anything I could ever leave on paper. I folded the letter gently, placed it beside my tea, and closed my eyes. There was no bitterness in his words, no cruelty, only love, only truth. He didn't leave me wealth. He left me witness. He didn't leave me vengeance. He left me vision. He didn't just leave me money. He left me him. And I wasn't about to waste it. I picked up my phone and wrote to Mr. Farrow. I'm ready to proceed, I typed. Within an hour, he replied. Understood. Transfers will begin this week. As requested, it will remain private. As requested. Of course. Grandpa never wanted a spectacle. He wanted peace. He didn't need to prove anything to the people who only came around when his time was almost up. He didn't want his legacy twisted into another family feud. He trusted me to carry it quietly. That night, I drove out to the cottage, my cottage. The key slid into the lock like it belonged there. The smell inside was earthy, cedar, linen, and the faint trace of cinnamon. Someone had cleaned. Likely Grandpa's lawyer had arranged it. Everything was in place. books on the shelf, blankets folded, a fire pit outside, stacked and ready. But on the mantel, one thing caught my breath. A photo. It was me, maybe age 11, standing beside Grandpa at the lake, a fishing pole twice my height in my hands. He was laughing, I was grinning. There was no one else in the frame. He had framed it himself. I touched the glass, smiling through tears. He remembered. He chose to remember. The others. They had wanted gold watches, trust funds, prestige. But he gave me the one thing they didn't know to ask for. Truth. And it was worth everything. I didn't plan for them to find out. That was never the goal. I had no dramatic speeches prepared, no fiery reveals, no moment of slamming the papers down in the middle of a family dinner and declaring, "Surprise, I was the chosen one." I didn't need that. Because Grandpa hadn't left me power for show. He left it for safety, for peace, for me. But truth doesn't stay buried. Not forever. And eventually it found its way to them. It started with a call to Jeremy. A routine property inquiry. He had just tried to pitch an Airbnb project in town and thought he could use the old business building Grandpa used to lease to a bakery. He called the county office, gave Grandpa's name, then went quiet when the clerk said, "That property doesn't belong to William Alcott anymore. It was transferred 6 months ago." Jeremy had asked, "Transferred to who?" The clerk answered, "Amara Alcott." And just like that, the ground beneath him shifted. Later that same week, Aunt Lynn received a notice. It was formal, dull-looking, just a stamped envelope from the local assessor's office. She thought it was tax-related. She opened it over her morning coffee and nearly choked on her croissant. It was a copy of a property reassessment. For the cottage, the one she thought had been demolished years ago. The deed listed a new sole owner. Me. By the end of that weekend, my inbox had 3 unread messages. All from family. All marked urgent. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Monday came with another surprise. Someone must have pushed further, hired someone to check Grandpa's financial records. Maybe a friend in banking, maybe a favor pulled at the lawyer's firm. Because by Tuesday morning, the group chat lit up. "Wait, does anyone know who Mara's lawyer is?" Jeremy asked. "I just saw something weird," wrote Cousin Brian. "Was she named on a separate trust?" "That can't be," said Tara. "She wasn't even in the will." "Apparently she was, just not the one we heard." Silence. Then finally, a message from Aunt Lynn. "If this is true, we've been played." But no one had played them? Not really. They just hadn't bothered to look beyond what was handed to them. They assumed the will they sat through was the only one, because it was loud, legal, public. But the real legacy? It lived somewhere quieter. And they hadn't known where to listen. I didn't make a statement. I didn't log on and write a monologue about loyalty or love. Instead, I posted a picture. It was just a photo of the lake at sunset, taken from the back porch of the cottage. Orange sky, water like glass, no caption, no explanation. But they knew. That night, my phone rang. It was my mother. She didn't say hello. She said, "They know." I stayed quiet. Then she added, "It's spreading fast. Lynn's furious. Jeremy wants to contest." I asked, "Is that why you're calling?" There was a pause. Then she said, "No. I'm calling because I need to say something I should have said a long time ago." I said nothing. "I'm sorry," my mother said, "for how I looked at you, for how I didn't fight for you when they dismissed you, for how I dismissed you." Still, I didn't speak. "You were there," my mother said. And I wasn't. Finally, I whispered, "Thank you." And she hung up. Some apologized, some stayed bitter. Aunt Lynn never reached out. But I saw her post online about ungrateful children and inheritance being twisted by manipulation. She didn't use names, she didn't have to. Jeremy sent me a voice memo. 2 minutes of circular logic and fake jokes. Hey, Mara, so, congrats? I guess you really pulled one over on all of us. Impressive. Just maybe think about what Grandpa would have wanted, yeah? I'm sure there's a way to make things more fair. I didn't reply, because fair wasn't what they wanted. They wanted familiar, a world where I was small, silent, and forgettable. But that version of me? She was gone. Instead, I focused on the life he'd asked me to build. I restored the cottage first, repainted the window frames, fixed the porch swing, took long walks in the woods, and reread Grandpa's letter each night until the pages softened with wear. Then I started volunteering, quietly, anonymously, at the veteran center he used to donate to. I didn't broadcast it. Didn't announce the trust. Didn't buy anything flashy. Because legacy isn't about show. It's about stewardship. It's about proving the right person wasn't chosen by accident. Once, when I drove into town to buy fresh paint, I ran into Brian at the hardware store. He looked surprised, awkward. He gestured toward the color swatches and said, "Making the place your own?" I nodded. He hesitated, then said, "For what it's worth, I think he got it right." I smiled. That was enough. Months passed, the noise died down, the lawsuits never came. Eventually, even the whispers faded, and I stayed. In the house he left me, on the land he trusted me to protect, living not in secrecy, but in peace. Sometimes I sit on the back porch and think about how everything changed without a single announcement. No grand reveal, no courtroom drama, no scenes, just slow, steady truth. Doing what it always does. Rising, like light through a cracked door. And now, when I think about what my mother whispered that day, those words I thought were warning me, I hear something else. Not fear, but wisdom. She had leaned in and said, "Don't tell them what you know." And she was right. I didn't have to say anything. The truth did that for me. If you enjoyed the story, let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe for good luck.